being here to share our talk on polar education and climate change. We'll give you an overview of polar education initiatives, Polar Educators International, known as PEI, Hearts in the Ice, and Ikavik Bridge in Inuktitut, a voice from the high Arctic. I'll be both host and participant, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Maria Pia Casarini, also the wife of Peter Wadhams. I'm a polar historian and vice president of Polar Educators International since 2017. I was former director of the Italian Zavatti Polar Institute and Museum, done 10 field expeditions, 8 in the Arctic and 2 in the Antarctic. Sharing this talk with me are two very special people. A dear friend, Sunniva Sorby, on my right, from Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada, and we are both members of the Society of Women Geographers in Washington, D.C. And we have a pleasure to have also Hilda Furlandström, who's lived in Svalbard for 26 years. Both Sunniva and Hilda are polar ambassadors and CEO, which means climate engagement officers. Sunniva made history in 1993 as part of the first team of women to ski to the South Pole. In 2020, both her and Hilda made history as the first women to spend 19 months solo on Svalbard. We also have a fourth participant, Shelley Elverum, who recorded her special contribution as she lives in the high Arctic in Pond Inlet, Baffin Island, Nunavut. So, question, why polar education? Well, a change in the polar ice was first noticed in the Arctic back in the 1980s. With the Arctic amplification, the region is experiencing the most extreme effects of global warming. These effects don't stop in the Arctic, but affect the whole planet, causing extreme climatic events, sea level rise, threat of methane, release from permafrost. Polar education is very important in making the public understand this connection, and a number of countries are including it in their teaching. So Hilda, what about polar education?
Well, I think that what's happening in the Arctic, as you said, doesn't stay in the Arctic. And none of us are immune to the warming of Arctic. And as we have learned now during our stay at Bamsebu, with experts on the call to kids from all over the world, 100,000 kids, we have learned a lot. And it doesn't only affect the population up in the north, it affects the whole world, even though the effect that actually makes the warming up in the north are done further south on the world. So we protect what we love, and knowledge change behavior.
Thank you. And now we are going to hear Sunniva's story about polar education and her connection to the polar regions.
Thank you. What a pleasure for me to be here today with you, Maria Pia, in collaboration with Polar Educators International. Years ago, I was down in Antarctica driving a Zodiac into a place called Paradise Bay. I cut the engine, and there was a man there that looked up at me and said, "And what are we supposed to see here?" And I was a little dumbfounded and very curious about his comment, and I found him later on the back deck of the ship. And I asked him a little bit about himself, and I later came to understand that he was actually supposed to be there on that trip with his wife, who had passed from cancer. So this man could neither see nor feel Paradise Bay. And you might ask, well, what in the world does this have to do with me being here today, or with this story? And for me, it elaborates something that's very real today. And that is the fact that there is darkness and suffering right now, quite a bit of it. So we see some of it, and some of it we cannot see. And I'm reminded of that great quote by Plato, "Be kind, for everyone is fighting a great battle." And right now, everyone is fighting a great battle. Climate change is real, and it's not a spectator sport. If we cannot agree on something as dramatic and as basic as a verified fact that the Arctic is warming 3 times faster than everywhere else in the world, then our hands are tied. And when it comes to the big stuff, and climate change globally is the big stuff, then we're in trouble. And it is now, and it's on our doorstep. Our collective purpose here in this world must be to preserve, protect, and save our ocean, the biodiversity of our species, our natural spaces, and each other, all of us. You know, if there's a question to ask, it's this: what role do I have in all of this? How can I be part of the solution? I asked that question years ago as I ached to find out how I could be relevant. And I found part of my answer in 2018 when I met Hilde. And I spent close to 25 years working in the polar regions, and I've been immersed in the impact of polar education and the power of polar education. The science, the stories, the history, the truths, and the local knowledge that exists and is dying to be told. You know, travel is a human business. And connecting cultures, blurring borders, sharing tradition, local knowledge, inspiring ideas for sustainability and exploitation, illuminating social injustices, and elevating the fact that we are all equal, yet equality does not exist. It would be no surprise to my family, friends, and colleagues that I would decide in 2018 to leave my job and my home in Canada to relocate to a tiny 20 square meter trapper's cabin way up in the Arctic, 78 degrees north, with no running water, no insulation, and no electricity. Does that not sound fun? Home would be called Bumsaboo, and this trapper's cabin was our base camp. We had solar panels, a windmill, and years of logistics and preparation with my co-founder Hilde Faldenström, and we use this as a platform for global dialogue, inspiration, storytelling, education, and social engagement around climate change in the polar regions. The Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard said, "When you label me, you negate me." This being said, I am many things, but mostly I'm a reflection of all of us here today. I'm a symbol of the power of community and collaboration to inspire active engagement and education around something that could otherwise and is diving us into deep depression and paralysis. Climate despair is a real thing. And let's face it, nature is boss, and we humans are in big trouble. We can live, as we've proved, on a lot less than we think we can. We can be caretakers and not complete consumers. Our life at Bumsaboo forced us to acknowledge the very fact that we're not in charge of everything. Everything we did was simple yet purposeful, and we lived close to nature and weather 24/7, and it was both difficult and beautiful in the same breath. We lived days in complete perfect stillness, a true luxury for unfettered original thought. So what does real exploration look like today? Well, it looks like Knut Rasmussen, son of a Danish missionary and mother of Inuit blood, who was an explorer and accomplished writer, who was actually the first European to cross the Northwest Passage via dog sled. Rasmussen shared his story of a people who found a way to survive in such a land. His ambitions were not an object or place, but rather a state of mind, at a depth of understanding that would allow him to reveal the wonders of the Inuit life. It is this sort of wonder and curiosity that all of us should seek to possess and live with. Just imagine that. It was this wonder and curiosity that Hilde and I lived with alone in the Arctic for 19 months, from September 2019 to May 2021. We were and are citizen scientists serving as a bridge between the science and the people to understand how to interpret the science. It's so complicated. Our education outreach was astounding, with experts like Kim Holman, Wade Davis, David Suzuki, and Dr. Jane Goodall. We used a satellite phone from our little rustic hut up in the Arctic with a video platform from Canada called Exploring by the Seat, with experts sharing their passionate love and expertise, and we connected with over 100 youth from around the world. Our citizen science was varied with phytoplankton, ice core samples, drone imagery for BCIT, cloud aurora, and a rocket launch observation for NASA, plastic and marine debris collection for Hütteruten, and wildlife observation, including polar bears, over 100 encounters, I might add, for the Norwegian Polar Institute. You know, changes in the last few years absolutely cannot be explained without taking into account human impact. We all know this. We need civic engagement to understand climate change, and citizen or community science is one way to accomplish that. It's a reality to say that the Indigenous people are the least responsible for the changes in our climate. Their work is often underestimated. And today, and it's always been this way, youth are our creative voice, and there are too few communication channels for youth to be decision makers that are used today. We need Indigenous knowledge to make sure science and local data feeds the research. We all need to be climate heroes. We all need to be CEOs, climate engagement officers. So what can people do? What can you do? One, look at what you value and stay grounded in those values. Protect what you love. Lead by example. Respect diversity and strive for better equity everywhere. What does it mean to be human today and to be alive today? There are 7,000 voices to answer that, and there are other people of the world with unique expressions of the human imagination and heart. Where there's love, there will always be hope. It was JFK who said, "Efforts and courage are not enough without purpose and direction." Let that quote be a call to action for the leadership here as we wind down a most pivotal COP26, and the clock is ticking. And for the record, shame on us if we do not get this right now, for our children and our grandchildren. Do we need more proof? No, we need action. Our world absolutely depends on it. So with that, I share our contact details for Hearts in the Ice, and please stay in touch because Mother Nature needs her daughters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can start talking about Polar Educators International. That's the association that I feel very proud to be associated with. Polar Educators International was founded in 2012 and was created from networks formed during the International Polar Year of 2007-2008. And as a direct outcome of the IPY, the International Polar Year Conference in Montreal, which was named From Knowledge to Action. Our mission is connecting polar education research and the polar community. By leading dialogue and collaboration between educators and researchers, PEI aims to highlight and share the global relevance of the polar regions. And really, anybody can be a polar educator. With us, we have more than 1,000 members, and we have scientists, educators, graduate students, community activists, museum curators, policy researchers, digital communicators, cruise ship lecturers, you name it. So we also recently included Indigenous knowledge in our mission statement, thanks to 2 new council representatives who are Arctic natives. Our vision is that we are an essential network of educators and researchers aiming to provide a deeper understanding of current polar sciences to a global audience. And really, we want to bridge the gap between science and education. And we have strategic goals, which we call the 3 C's, communicate, collaborate, and create, to develop a robust, flexible, trusted international presence, grow and strengthen the PEI network and its relationships, and provide relevant and timely opportunities for both education and scientific communities. We have taken part in defining meetings such as Polar 2018 in Davos, and we were asked, that was a great honor to be asked to participate in the 3rd Arctic Science Ministerial that took place in Tokyo in May this year. Out of the outcomes of the International Polar Year was a book, Polar Science and Global Climate, published in 2010. We call it the Polar Resource Book, and we are now in the process of publishing online an updated edition with funding from APEX, the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, SCAR, the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, and IASC, the International Arctic Science Committee. We will continue to provide accessible tools to strengthen teaching and communication on important Arctic science for whom global climate change will impact the most. We hold international conferences every 2 years where educators from around the world come together for professional development and networking by educators for educators. After Coimbra, Hanover, Rovereto, and Cambridge, the next one will be in Iceland. and will be called Stories in Ice. That will be next April. We have spent this year, because we couldn't have it in 2021 because of the pandemic, we spent this year providing a Hlassborð, a loaded table in Icelandic, online events on science and indigenous knowledge, Arctic Sci-Art, Snap Talks, hands-on activities. And we are also going to start a global conversation based on the concept of a World Cafe. All of these are available on our website. Part of the Hlassborð was a 24-hour share-a-thon that I was responsible for, which took place at the Equinox in September and was also presented at the Pre-COP in Milan at the end of September after being approved by the Italian Ministry of Ecological Transition. I'm actually from Milan, so that was kind of easy to be there. Here we leave you with our contacts, and remember, anybody can become a polar educator. We now hear the voice from the Arctic, Shelley Elverum, who serves on the Council of Polar Educators International.
Hi, I'm Shelley Elverum, and I'm lucky enough to have lived for the past 20 years in the community of Pond Inlet on the north tip of Baffin Island in Canada's Arctic. I'm here today to invite you to think a little bit differently about what Arctic education can mean, and in a broader sense, what it means to listen and learn from the people who live in the Arctic. At the same time, I'd like to invite you to consider how we can look for new opportunities, not just to take lessons from Arctic peoples, but also to bring new information into the Arctic communities that are often burdened with poor internet and lack real opportunities to access the same information that people in the outside world are able to about climate change. It's actually a little bit crazy that people who live outside the Arctic often have a better ability and better bandwidth and technology to be able to access current scientific information about climate change than the people who actually live here. Before we begin, I'd really like to toss out that analogy about Arctic peoples being sort of the canaries in the coal mine of climate change. Because you know, the canary dies, right? And you know, the canary is just kind of sitting there passively while the world around it is changing. Instead, let's think about circumpolar Indigenous peoples as being both the ultimate actors in and educators in a changing Arctic environment. I'd like to introduce Ikarvik, the program that I work with. It was created to fill an incredibly huge gap, and it was created by Inuit youth here in Canada. In Inuktitut, the Inuit language, Ikarvik means a bridge, and it was created out of that need to be able to bridge Indigenous knowledge and Western science, and to be able to ensure that Indigenous peoples are not just the subjects of science, but active participants and real partners in understanding Arctic change. Why does this matter, and what are the implications for polar education? Well, beyond being a huge human rights issue, what you may not realize when you hear Arctic science is that you might only be getting part of the story. How do I know that? Well, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a minute and visualize Arctic scientists. What is it that you see in your mind? Let me guess. It's probably a bunch of white people in Gore-Tex hopping out of a helicopter with frosty beards, holding an ice auger or some other kind of technological equipment. But let's look a little bit deeper. The Indigenous people who are just past that group of scientists out on their own lands and waters are really, they're the scientists and researchers that we need to be hearing from. As I see it, research is an act of observing, hypothesizing, testing, interpreting, and communicating knowledge. And that's something that Indigenous people have always done, and is in fact the reason that people have been able to survive in the circumpolar world. I work with an amazing young Inuit man named Justin Milton, who at 16 was able to create this awareness that Inuit are the original Arctic scientists. So if you think about what Inuit have always done to survive, observing, hypothesizing, testing, and communicating, that's the science that's allowed circumpolar peoples to survive. So what does this mean to truly have Indigenous voices in research, and what are the advantages of this for polar education? Well, if we agree that circumpolar Indigenous peoples are the original Arctic scientists, then we need to agree that the best research and best knowledge about the North combines this almost like a zipper. This analogy was created by my friend and mentor, Ina, who, as a mother and as a seamstress and a researcher, was able to understand that Indigenous knowledge and science have often tried to be jammed together for understanding. But with her experience as a seamstress, she was able to say that Indigenous knowledge and science and technology can be used like a zipper to hold two different ways of knowing together and ultimately produce something that is stronger than two unequal parts. The end result is better information for decision making and the better ability for educators to connect the human story of climate change in the Arctic. As educators, you truly understand that the value of connecting science with our collective human experience is the way to make this stuff resonate with the general population. Only by understanding what a changing Arctic means to the people who live there can we understand what it means for all of us. Our goal with the Karvik is to really place youth in a critical role in the center of this type of conversation. We believe that youth have a remarkable ability by having a foot in two worlds, as they're often being told. They have the ability to understand Indigenous ways of life and social values and knowledge, along with the ability to understand and use science and technology. So being told you have a foot in two worlds is actually just an amazing advantage that Indigenous youth can use to be able to ensure that their communities and science are working together pretty much seamlessly. We do this by starting with a simple premise, which is that Indigenous knowledge and science are stronger together. We work with youth and we ask a very simple question, which is, if science was completely up to you, what would you and your communities want to be studying? The youth come up with priorities, which they run by elders and hunters and community leadership, and come up with ideas on what they would like to study in a way that combines Indigenous knowledge and science. They then work with scientists in a way that's truly collaborative and co-mentoring in such a way that makes sure that capacity is built both ways. Why is it important? Well, honestly, it creates better, more relevant knowledge for decision making. But please keep in mind that this is not about harvesting interesting stories from Indigenous people. It's about supporting a two-way foundation for sharing knowledge for better decision making. So now let's bring this back to polar education. Why does this matter? Well, polar educators are in an incredible position to be able to help Indigenous Arctic peoples to amplify their voices, share their knowledge, and their lived experiences around climate change. I'm going under the assumption that as polar educators, you want to tell the full story of a changing Arctic and that you want this to resonate with your audience. I can't think of a better way to do this than to tell the human story, and not one that we're used to seeing of Indigenous peoples as victims of climate change, but as uniquely placed specialists who can help all of us understand why a changing Arctic affects us all. And I'd just like to wrap up by saying that again, youth are in a remarkable position to be able to do a two-way transfer of knowledge and experiences that if we're really talking about polar education, we need to be really celebrating the role of Indigenous youth and being able to help all of us understand a changing Arctic. You can reach me at shelleyelverum@gmail.com and feel free to check out eKarvik. It's a fantastic program for Indigenous youth. Look forward to hearing from you.
Would anybody from the floor like to ask a question?
Very inspiring. I think the ones who really need inspiration, in addition to the leaders, are the young people. What is your message for the young people?
Well, I think we have been talking to more than 100,000 kids throughout our 19 months at Bamsebu through a little dish powered by solar and wind, and they are so engaged. They have the best questions, and the experts really often have a hard time to answer them. Well, I think that we need to tell them that they have a lot more power than they think, because they go home to their parents, to their grandparents, and tell them how things are going to be. So just empower them, tell them that we need them, and they are tomorrow leaders, and we hear them.
We, the group of Facing Future, of course, Scientist Warning, have the incredible lesson of our beloved Stuart Scott, the one that actually discovered Greta Thunberg. So talking of engagement of young people, we couldn't go farther than that. And I've seen, even in Italy, the incredible message of Greta's. We were in Turin, and there were 50,000 students on her Fridays for Future. And it was such a shame that the pandemic stopped all that, because that was really going very strongly. And so let's hope that the message will become clearer and in the political world as well, because the children of today are the voters of tomorrow. And we thank you all very much for being here, and we hope to have conveyed the passion that we share for the polar regions and the people who live there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.